Welcome, everybody. I hope you've had a good lunch break. And we would now like to welcome you to the final session of this conference, which will focus on the challenges of bilateral state cooperation and cyber capacity building measures in Africa. My name is John Reyels, and I'm pleased to join you from Berlin. I'm here at the German Federal Foreign Office, where I'm head of the cyber staff. So this panel session will focus on both the opportunities and the challenges of designing and implementing cyber capacity building projects. The regional focus this afternoon will be on Africa, which in my opinion is really one of the most interesting and dynamic regions in the world with regards to cyber capacity building. Africa has already covered a lot of groundwork in terms of capacity building, particularly on the legal and policy front, but many issues remain to be tackled, in particular with regards to implementation. What makes this panel particularly interesting is that we have two sides approaching this topic. We have the policy and diplomatic side represented, but we also have two experts with us with a lot of experience in implementing cyber capacity building projects in Africa. So we hope to cover a lot of ground with you in this short 1 hour session. And I'd like to give the opening words to my colleague Regine Grienberger, who will deliver a keynote intervention for this panel. Regine Grienberger is the Director for Cyber, Foreign and Security Policy here at the Federal Foreign Office in Berlin. And in her career in the German diplomatic service, she's had a focus on European affairs with postings to Slovenia and Italy. And before joining her present position as cyber ambassador, she's been the deputy head of our minister's office. So with this very short introduction, Regine, I'd like to give the floor to you for your opening. Regine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I waited for another jingle. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to be here and start this session with you. I see some familiar faces on this screen, and I take the new faces as an indicator for the fact that our community is still growing, which is very good, of course. A big thank you for the organizers of this event and for the opportunity to contribute some perspectives from Berlin as part of the EU CyberNet Annual Conference 2021. Cyber capacity building is very en vogue now, and rightly so. While the digital transformation is unstoppable, cyber risks, which are closely linked to this process, increase. Every digital device going online adds to the attack surface, and therefore the need to build frameworks, capabilities, and literacy to mitigate these risks. Our community must contribute to preparing the ground for the next billion internet users so that they can also take advantage of digital transformation with its political, societal, and economic effects. EU CyberNet picked the main topic of this year's conference, building cyber capacities in the digital decade, at exactly the right time. Not only because we are at the beginning of this decade, but because the COVID pandemic dramatically accelerated digitization, and many of us, as many others elsewhere, were not too well prepared. Governments must always anticipate and adapt to new circumstances and challenges. But these circumstances are particularly challenging. And there is one bottleneck, and this is human resources and technical as well as political expertise. Cyber capacity building is strategic in nature and requires technical savvy and political foresight. The fact that even the world's leading economic powers wrestle with cybersecurity problems proves the dimension of the task lying ahead of us. And as we have all seen, cyber threats often ignore borders, weaving their insidious ways across regions, especially those with impunity for cybercrime. That is why, in addition to protecting networks and critical infrastructures, we see it as a duty for Europeans to pass on our own best practices and lessons learned within the framework of cyber capacity building with partner nations around the world. We already have a solid foundation of cooperative measures in place, but we must rapidly enhance and expand these partnerships. We intend to intensify our cyber capacity building efforts, but not as a one-way street, but a two-way street. We see great potential for Africa as an exemplary region for close partnership in the cyber realm. To this end, we want to engage with cyber champions across the continent. They already have a solid foundation in the field of information technology to build, and we believe that close cooperation will be beneficial for them, for us, and for the whole region. In today's session, we would like to look at some of the key hurdles to overcome cyber capacity building, to have a successful cyber capacity building. The first crucial step is an examination of what is meant by digitization. What fields and technologies come into play in this work? And do these definitions translate across borders? How can we most effectively establish shared ideals and goals in this effort? These are some of the questions underpinning our initial efforts in this domain. As we continue laying the groundwork for vital partnerships, every step must come with the intention of building trust and optimizing communication. In concrete terms, for us, cyber capacity building encompasses the following areas: strategy and normative frameworks, prevention and resilience, technical preparedness and standard setting, protection of technical system and networks, especially with regard to critical infrastructure. Our panelists will offer a more substantive overview of these areas. In addition to strategic information from my Italian colleague, Laura, we will also benefit from practical presentations from both German and African implementation partners. This will give us a good overview in the next hour. Let's have an in-depth look at the challenges that have to be overcome so that bi- and multilateral cooperation opportunities in the area of cyber capacity building can flourish. I wish you all a constructive and inspiring session, and thank you for your partnership. Bye.
Thank you, Regine. Thank you for starting off this panel and for reminding us of the urgency of cyber capacity building. And let's tackle this discussion, as you said, cyber capacity building as a two-way street. I think this is something, this is a slogan that is worth exploring together with our partners from Africa here today. And Regina, I believe you need to leave this meeting, but thanks for being with us. And we'll now start our panel discussion. I'm very happy to welcome here as our panelists Dr. Towela Nyirenda-Jere, who's head of the Economic Integration Division at the African Union Development Agency. I'd also like to welcome Laura Carpini, who's head of cybersecurity and policies in the Political and Security Affairs Directorate General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy in Rome. And I'm also pleased to welcome Björn Richter, who is leading the GIZ sector program for digital development. GIZ is the a German agency for international cooperation, which many of you may know. Let us start with a view from Africa. And I'd like to turn to Dr. Towela Nyirenda-Jere. Dr. Towela's division at the African Union Development Agency actually spearheads flagship programs and implementation frameworks that advance regional integration in line with the aspirations of the AU's Agenda 2063. Dr. Towela is an electrical engineer by training, and she's a development practitioner with more than 20 years experience of working in the private sector, academia, international development. So Towela, we're very happy to have you with us and very excited to hear your perspective on the topic. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you for that kind introduction. So good afternoon and good evening to everybody. And just to start by thanking the organizers really for the opportunity to participate in this discussion, not only to share the perspectives from Africa, but I think to also learn from the perspectives from other countries and other regions as well. So by way of contextualizing, so I work with the African Union Development Agency, which is a technical arm of the African Union, and which basically supports implementation of key strategic frameworks developed at the level of the Union. So when we start talking about cyber capabilities or cyber capacity building, there are several frameworks that have been developed that are relevant at the level of the African Union that speak to digitalization, that speak to cybersecurity, and ICTs in general. Most importantly and very significant is the digital transformation strategy, which was adopted a few years back, and which is then leading to the development of strategies that are sectoral in nature. So it's health strategies, education strategies, strategies for agriculture, strategies for usage of the postal sector, for instance, to enhance urban-rural connectivity. We have the AU Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, and a whole lot of other frameworks that are emanating in the field of data policies, child online protection, and so on. What this then means is that, number one, is that these strategies have to be translated into national strategies and frameworks, but then also we have to deal with the attendant issues of the capacity then in the member states to actually implement and make sure that there is the requisite capacity in the countries. I think it's also important to mention that with the start of trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area this year, issues around e-services, e-commerce will become very significant for Africa, and that will also then call into question issues around the stability and resilience of our cyber capacities, but also making sure that we do have the requisite technical and operational capacity and infrastructure as well. So I think by way of maybe sharing experiences and speaking to the theme of the panel and this conference, I will offer maybe 4 or 5 examples and maybe just talk through them and just give an idea of some of the challenges that we've seen, and also just maybe point to some of the opportunities that are therefore presented. So I'll start with the Africa School on Internet Governance, which was modeled on the European School of Internet Governance. And the idea was to see how we could use the model of the European School of Internet Governance to provide the same sort of environment for developing capacity in internet governance for Africa. So that work started in 2012, and since then we've managed to have 9 editions of that school. It continues to sustain and to grow, I think, as the years progress. Important, I think, in terms of AfriSig and really how it came about. Obviously, much as it was modeled on EuroSig, it was African-led and has been African-led and African-owned since inception. But also there has been a very deliberate effort to adapt and to localize the content and to localize the approaches to suit the needs of African stakeholders and make sure that the training resonates, but also it speaks to the needs of the stakeholders as well. The second example that I would offer is the Africa Internet Governance Forum, which also modeled on the global IGF, and again, seeking to develop the capacity on the continent to engage in these global spaces and to discuss issues related to internet governance, which we felt were very important also for the continent. And again, that process was one of learning from past examples and for those that had gone before us, but also making sure that we were able to adapt and localize. Important to mention also that using the Africa IGF and using a lot of other different spaces in which stakeholders across the ICT and cyber community would gather, there has always been that practice of how do we build in capacity building into these different fora. And that has been, I think, a very good way of enhancing the capacity across the continent by using existing platforms to actually enhance and develop capacity, using those platforms also to identify the gaps and the weaknesses in terms of the expertise across the continent. The third example that I want to offer has to do with just broadly looking at the landscape of cybersecurity across the continent. So the AUDA-NEPAD, in line with the Convention on Cybersecurity, undertook some assessments just to get a sense of how member states were doing and dealing with the provisions of being able to implement the requirements of the convention. And the idea for us was that we wanted to understand what challenges were being faced by member states in implementing some of the provisions, but also then to understand how do we design purpose-built interventions that were relevant for the different member states. So we did an assessment for 10 countries initially. And what we found was that a lot of countries had policies, a lot of countries had strategies, but most of them were either outdated or were not being implemented effectively. And what we also saw was that because the convention requires quite a lot of institutional measures in terms of being able to follow through on some of the provisions, the institutional measures were where member states were finding perhaps a lot of challenges in terms of being able to actually conform or comply with the requirements of the convention. And what we also saw was that in some instances where policies existed, strategies to accompany those policies and implementation plans perhaps were lacking or were not being implemented adequately. The third or the fourth example that I will give is a very new project that we are now involved in with the Global Forum for Cyber Expertise. And this is really looking very specifically at the issue of cyber capacity building. And it has three components. So one is just understanding what the cyber capacity building needs are, and therefore deriving programs to address those needs. Then looking at the establishment of a community of experts, an African cyber experts community. And lastly, developing fit-for-purpose knowledge modules based on the needs identified and needs expressed. So this is a project that has just started this year, and it will cover all member states of the African Union. So it is a process by which we are actually engaging with the member states individually in terms of just getting a sense of what their needs are, but also getting focal persons across different stakeholder constituencies to become part of this community of experts. The idea here is that we want to be able to grow this community of experts into something that is a sustainable platform and a sustainable way of making sure that we are constantly on top of the cyber capacity building needs of the continent, that we have an avenue where these needs can be expressed, but we also want to be able to have a platform that allows us to coordinate and share information so that we avoid duplication of effort and wastage of resources and inefficiencies that arise when there are so many programs and projects being implemented by various partners. So we want to be able to harness the power of partnerships through this community, through the sharing of knowledge and experiences, and also sharing of who is doing what where, so we are able to optimize and maximize partners and resources. Then lastly, in line with that, we are also working to establish a network of African women in cybersecurity, because we recognize that perhaps there is a need to have a very deliberate focus that speaks to building cyber capacity and cyber expertise that is addressing the specific needs of women. And so this network of experts will be able to provide very specific inputs into the capacity building projects, into the policy frameworks, and into other programs that is very oriented towards the specific issues that affect girls and women on the continent. So having said that, I think perhaps talking about challenges and talking about opportunities, I think one will see that from the various examples that there are many ways of building capacity. Number one. Number two, I think it's also the fact that capacity is required at different levels and in different forms. So we need capacity at the level of the policymakers. We need capacity at the level of our academic institutions. We need capacity in the private sector. And we need capacity even at the very lower levels when we start talking about our young people, the youth, the ones who are going to be the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the ones who are going to manage all these networks. They need to be capacitated. And the capacity needs are different. You start with basic literacy. I think which Regine alluded to, the fact that you need basic literacy, but then you also need to start looking at very specialized kinds of capacity, and at the same time looking at operational capacity that would be able to move the continent forward. Some challenges I think that we face, of course, we note that there is diversity among the countries on the continent. This diversity is in the form of languages, in the form of culture, in the form of legal systems, and also in the form of differences in the levels of development. And sometimes those can also pose challenges when you're developing content, for instance. At the level of the African Union, we have 5 official languages. And typically, if you are going to do capacity building, you have to make sure that it's accessible to everybody across the continent, and therefore make sure that that content can be made available in the different languages. It also has to be available in different forms and formats that are accessible depending on the capabilities that member states or the individual users have in their countries. So we also have to look at making sure that the content or capacity building measures are easily accessible. And then, of course, the fact that clearly we still have challenges in terms of the skills and expertise on the continent means that we often find ourselves having to rely on external expertise, which is a good thing. But at the same time, I think it's always this issue of how do you build in sustainability? How do you build in the transfer of capacity and capability to make sure that we are somehow over time able to break this cycle of dependency? So I think in terms of opportunities, there's quite a lot that can be done. And I think that much as we can focus on the individual capacity building, I think that there's a need to really look at institutions and to really look at institutional capacity building and address that so that should then form the foundation and allow us to address some of the challenges that we have. I think in conclusion, I would say that we have the policies, we have the strategies, we have the frameworks. We have to think a little bit differently, I think, about capacity building and make capacity building a priority in terms of the strategies, and make sure that this is embedded across our entire educational system, that it is embedded in professional development, and that is embedded in our institutions as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Towela, for this very wide overview of capacity building in Africa. I think that you've really mentioned many excellent points that we will follow up in our discussion. Let me just quote a couple. I think what's very important is that you said capacity building is really needed at different levels, be it academic, operational, or policy, and the needs are of course different, always depending on the level that you would like to address. You've mentioned the importance of mapping challenges and needs. You've mentioned the importance of establishing community of experts to develop knowledge, but also of establishing networks like the Women Network that you mentioned. I think a very important key concept that came up again and again through your contribution was adapt and localize content and approaches. So this is, I think, something that we really need to think about and discuss a little bit further. You've also highlighted the diversity of the African continent. So really saying that there's no one fits all approach when we deal with Africa. And of course, as you said in closing, I thought that was very powerful. You said the knowledge and the strategies are there. Now we really need to make sure that capacity building becomes a political priority. And the question is how do we actually manage to put capacity building up there at the top of political agendas in Africa. With that very rich start, let me now give the floor to you, Laura. Laura has actually had her last posting in Africa, where she served as Italy's ambassador to Ghana. And she's had positions previously really pretty much all over the world, with postings in New York, in Cuba, and in India. And now 2 years ago, she's joined as the head of cybersecurity and policies at the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Laura, it's my pleasure to now give you the floor for a European diplomatic perspective on capacity building in Africa.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the organizers for this invitation. I'm really very happy to take part in this conversation and also to intervene after Regine and our colleague from the African Union. Therefore, I'll really be able I hope to be able to bridge the points made by the two previous speakers, also in the capacity of belonging to a country that always likes to portray itself as a bridge across the Mediterranean, linking the European and African continents. Now, as it has been masterfully said by Regine, the international debate on cyber capacity building has gained remarkable momentum, and she has very well explained the reasons for this. I won't dwell much into that. But we are called by international organizations, and first and foremost by the UN, to proactively respond to cyber capacity building requests, mainly and firstly to help closing the digital divide. We need to therefore act and implement initiatives such as those highlighted in recommendations of both the OEWG and the GGE. These recommendations spell important principles like mutual understanding and respect. There are cornerstones for the activities in this field. But it would be wrong to look at capacity building initiatives as only a means to contribute to shared commitments. Rather, we see them as the key to first build a shared understanding of security in an interconnected environment. Secondly, to allow all states to participate in a meaningful manner to digitalization. And thirdly, for them to seize the opportunities that it offers, and also to participate in international discussions, and therefore to further develop the framework for responsible state behavior that we have all collectively signed up to. As far as Italy is concerned, we very honestly, I have to say that we are not a big cyber capacity building power yet. We are building our national architecture has been recently reformed, and a new agency for cybersecurity has been created and is in the process of being staffed. And one of its tasks will be international cooperation. Therefore, with them, we are building together what we believe should be the Italian approach to cyber capacity building. And we believe in an ecosystemic approach. Therefore, we are nationally working to create an integrated system of expertise based on solid and tested national architecture, participation of different institutional actors, a well-defined economic model defined by private sector champions, but meaning private sector, we intend not only those private sector who offer and work already in the cybersecurity field, but also those industrial champions that have made their own security a defining feature, has to better explain how, also for a company, investing in cybersecurity is by now a must. And finally, a vibrant set of academics and diplomats specialized in ensuring a meeting of minds and, of course, of interests. And in this sense, cyber capacity building is a much mutually reinforcing activity because it is in the interest of both the beneficiary and the so-called provider. It requires trust and good relations that, in turn, will be further consolidated to the process, because you need good relation and trust to start discussing what is needed and how to provide it, but also this will benefit the relation. So the result should be an increased shared security for the benefit of everyone. And of course, a sense of ownership is key. One important aspect that I had noticed from the intervention of our colleague from the African Union is sustainability of actions. And actually, in my capacity, former capacity as ambassador to Ghana, I have witnessed this aspect in really firsthand. Initiatives need to be sustained and sustainable. One-off events or initiatives do not help. Also, it is very important to match demand and offer. What we think it is important might not be necessarily a priority, and sometimes it could even be perceived as an imposed cost. And as she has already said, I'm kind of repeating, but probably not repeating, but really stressing and agreeing with what she said, diversification. Africa is, like many other continents, is a very diversified continent, and needs are so too. Finally, mapping and assessments are important, as well as moving slowly from literacy to practical and operational programs. From a more diplomatic perspective, multilateralism is important, so partnerships with regional and sub-regional organizations can offer the channels needed to establish link, and additional opportunities to promote capacity building will need really to be explored via the African Union and NEPAD, or through ECOWAS, SADC, and NIGAT. There's plenty of organizations we should and could look at for this also. Bilateral ties have offered us recently the opportunity of offering capacity building through our academia and the relentless work of our diplomatic network, thanks to COVID, by organizing online seminars on cybersecurity in both Zambia and Zimbabwe. It's a model that we look at replicating, as it also creates intra-regional links and ties. Finally, talking about the northern side of Africa, we are going to organize a second edition of the Med Dialogue Cyber Forum, an event which brings together high-level public representatives and senior professionals from government, academia, and industry. And this forum is focused always on capacity building to advance effective cooperation and increasing trust and dialogue among regional partners, and precisely trying to identify capacity building needs and opportunities. So, this is all very positive, but are there challenges? Yes, definitely. I think that to develop a level of maturity and capacity enabling us to provide a sought-for cyber ecosystem, this requires time and dedicated resources, both at a human and financial level. So cross-fertilization of expertise is really an activity which will need to be enhanced in the coming months and years. We insist on the promotion of multi-stakeholder approach that might not be easy to put in place. Often there are divergent divisions, inadequate planning, insufficient funding and personnel, territorial, economic and social political aspects that can threaten the result. So all this can contribute to a mismatch between who has the information and who is in charge of delivering it. In the future, we think that it's therefore pivotal to work on structure and initiatives that bring closer expertise, providers, and recipients. And in this context, I think that EU CyberNet, being a very ambitious project and a very homogeneous one, is very well placed to be the champion of this offer. So to conclude, I think that successful capacity building depends on the development on the human component, but also proper access to financial resources. And in the latter, I must highlight that not many countries have the legal structure to do that. And I'm very interested to hear what the next speakers, the representatives of the agency, for instance, will say, because of the finding the nexus between traditional development cooperation and this new form of bilateral relation that is more focused on security aspects. So with that, I thank you for your attention and for this opportunity to share our point of view. And over to you, John.
Laura, thank you very much. I think you've really approached this topic and from all thinkable diplomatic fronts. I particularly liked your slogan of using an ecosystemic approach. I think that's really a wonderful image for us to keep in mind, because that really brings together that idea of all the different actors that really need to be involved in making capacity building successful: government agencies, industry, academics, and diplomats. And I think it's also very important to keep in mind what you highlighted as a basis of really starting capacity building, and that is trust and good relations. And this really means that capacity building projects only make sense in a bilateral or multilateral setup where we can operate on a basis of trust and a certain level of mutual understanding. Otherwise, operating in such a sensitive policy area, will be doomed to failure. So this is really something that we need to keep in mind as a basis for our activities. Thank you, Laura. We will now turn to the implementation side again. And I'm very happy to pass the floor to Björn Richter, who is leading the GIZ sector program for digital development. Björn Richter is advising the German Development Cooperation at the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development with regards to developing innovative digital projects and new approaches to enable digital transformation. Björn Richter has in his previous positions advised senior representatives of partner countries in the ASEAN region but also in Southern Africa, as well as in Afghanistan and Pakistan. I now give the floor to you, Björn Richter. Are you joining us from Germany, actually, or are you based somewhere abroad right now?
No, very, very boring. I'm Germany. I'm in Germany and in Bonn. And as we all know, I think I'm admiring the colleagues in the room that they have a meeting in presence. I think it's somehow still the options are rare, but we see actually that the digital transformation agenda really through the COVID-19 pandemic went through the roof in our partner countries that we're supporting. But we also see precisely what Laura pointed out, that the classical development cooperation framework and what she called the ecosystem, what we call the digital ecosystem, are still not overlapping yet. So, and I think we're working on this. And as a German, I prepared a presentation. So I shortly run you through the short presentation. Hopefully, it's been seen on the screen.
So yes, we can see it. Excellent.
So what we are currently implementing is a Trust for Cyber flagship project. We worked on this topic for quite some years, but we also understood that senior decision makers, particularly because of the nexus of security and development cooperation, are very shy in getting really big programs and projects out, and not only in the areas of donors, but also in the areas of partner countries. So what we actually had a look into is to set up a project with activities on policy exercises, but very clearly then going to what we call landscape mappings, and then providing very concrete tools. One of them being at Trust for Cyber Toolbox, and the other one being an exercise that I shortly come to, where we really try to make it very transparent and clear what cybersecurity actually means and why it's a holistic approach needed. So we try to still raise the awareness, and how we do this, we work from Germany, but in 7 countries with our so-called country offices and the so-called digital transformation centers, which are basically advising digital ministries and regulatory authorities on digital transformation in the particular countries. The project tries to work out, as I said, on the area of cybersecurity policy exercises, and then utilizing the experiences from the 7 countries by bundling them into online digital available capacity building formats that can be and are currently being set up with the Africa Digital Alliance. This is the alliance, I think, of digital ministries, of 30 digital ministries in Africa, which is working closely with the African Union and the regional economy communities. Out of that, we are developing a Trust for Cyber toolbox, where capacity development materials for the digital ecosystem is being stored and is being developed into online formats. I think I wanted to emphasize here that for us, it's important to work, and that is actually what we learned, that not only working with governments, but also with civil society and private sector stakeholders. So we see, and I come to this, we see a lot of interest, not only from civil society that were involved in a lot of data protection laws and also cyber context in some of the countries. We see also a lot of interest from private sector and network stakeholders to assure that their investment is being sustainably implemented. So that is actually an interesting observation. And that's maybe we shortly wanted to focus because we implemented the first cyber policy exercises already in Rwanda and Kenya with digital ministries and the regulatory authorities. And what that basically means is to simulate a cyber attack on a critical infrastructure in a particular country. So there's a methodological framework. We do this together with We have a couple of think tanks also from African soil, and we clearly said there's a certain kind of foundational framework. There's the exercise itself, and then there's the review of this exercise and in the adaptation of lessons learned into not only the policy framework, but also on the operational way, how the regulatory authorities and the digital ministries are working. When it came to that exercise, we don't want it to go to the classical cyber capacity development, but rather raise awareness for the need of a human-centered as well as multi-stakeholder approach, which I think Laura rightly laid out is quite rare still. So we just started this implementation in April. We will run further a partner workshop with our partners from the digital ministries in South Africa, Kenya, but also Ghana in Africa. We will focus as well as on Mexico and Jordan because we think it's a global exercise, and that's why we try to work also on different continents. And there's a cybersecurity landscape mapping being done by a Kenyan think tank also for Kenya in order to have a look into the Kenyan exercise, which we believe is one of the important players because the framework is already very rich and could be seen as a way forward. The cooperation, I think, with the Federal Office for Information Security, one of the very important players on cyber in Germany, and obviously also the Foreign Office is very clear for us because there's a very clear policy framework where Europe and Africa are working together, and we were quite happy. And I think we just wanted to congratulate all the diplomats in the room. We were really happy from the development agency perspective to see the declaration of the EU-AU. The Minister Council from Kigali, from I think the day before yesterday, where digital transformation is being enshrined now as one of the top priority, including issues like data security and also information exchange on a human-centered level. I think that's a very interesting way forward, and we're looking forward for the summit of the African Union and the European Union. Hope for more concrete guidance. What we learned actually is. And that we learned very much and very clear in the last couple of months. You cannot really run cybersecurity as an exercise in a single project, but rather mainstream cybersecurity capacity development. So altogether, we have 12 flagship projects working also on data economy and gig economy, working with Smart Africa on the so-called Smart Africa Digital Academy or the digital transformation centers. And what we realized is we have to put this as a cross-cutting topic into all the programs that we're currently running with our partners, because the partners clearly requested, and I have to say clearly requested also from Germany as a custodian of the GDPR and also as a custodian of human-centered digital development, more technical expertise. And so that's why the last slide is just to showcase you what does that mean. Besides the project Cyber for Security, we realized that we have to mainstream the topic into what we call the ICT Building Block Initiative, where we work with the Horn of Africa Secretariat together, that we mainstream this through the digital transformation centers into the advisory services, that they can utilize the online courses and that they could utilize also the exercises for the advisory services that we have to work, and we're working on cybersecurity and the AI privacy strategies. It's also integrated part on the data economy, particular advising on the African regional data governance blueprint that is currently being developed. And last but not least, put this online as the open educational resources for all of the other partners, for example, the World Bank and the ITU that we're working with on the online cyber security courses on the Smart Africa Digital Academy, where all the partners, I think, can also utilize that capacity framework in a digital format, and where also the way forward is for sure digital also on capacity development. So I think that's a bit our lessons learned. The policy discussion is very, very rich and very interesting. We really learned civil society and private sector to take serious. Also from German side, Siemens and Munich Re are very interested to see how to cooperate. We haven't figured out a way forward on that one, but we will still maintain the cross-cutting issue and will still work with the multi-stakeholder approach, because this is not a once-off activities. If you look into the funding that is coming from the World Bank, 40 billion euros into Africa on infrastructure, if you look into the funding of the EU infrastructure that will come to Africa, also I think 2 to 3 million euros. There's a lot of infrastructure that is currently being developed. If capacity developments still stays that weak, as the colleague from AUDA has pointed out, I think there's a lot of security risk that we run into, because you have to maintain this infrastructure and have to really train people on this one. And I think we do our first bit on this one, but for sure this is something, as always in digital, to be shared and to grow together. Thank you.
Great, thanks to you, Björn Richter, for this excellent presentation. I think your project has really shown us how all these different building blocks that we have mentioned in the previous presentations can actually be built into a single project if you build it in this kind of multi-directional way that you've explained. You're running a project involving private sector, involving regulation, but also involving crisis management, all the way to crisis management simulation exercises. And what I found very interesting is that you said you're running similar programs as part of this project also in Jordan and Mexico. So you really have this opportunity for cross-fertilization among different world regions. I think that's also a very, very valuable component. And thanks for reminding us of how this particular focus on cybersecurity capacity building is embedded in the wider digitalization agenda. It was very impressive to see that one of your last slides, where you actually mentioned those 12 flagship projects totaling 150 million euro, which in total really tackle the entire digitalization agenda. And so thank you so much for this contribution from GIZ. We have actually run a little bit over time already, and I don't see questions coming from the room. I'm checking back on the Parallel Works Up website. Please correct me if I'm overlooking something, but I don't see questions coming from the room right now. And I must confess that I'm actually tied with another speaking engagement starting in 7 minutes, where I need to virtually head to Garmisch-Partenkirchen to the George Marshall Center for a cybersecurity program, a contribution that I need to make there. So I'd in view of that, I'd like to suggest we close this panel. Would have loved to engage a little bit with all of you in Brussels who are hopefully assembled in that room that we've seen previously. The organizers of this conference have asked me to say a couple of words in closing, because I understand that this is the closing of your conference day. And in the name of the organizers, I'd like to underline that this has really been an excellent opportunity today in bringing together very interesting speakers on various cyber, digital, and capacity building issues, as well as participants both on-site and virtually. I'd like to say on behalf of the organizers that we are very thrilled that so many of you have joined us today, and we very much hope that there will be many occasions in the future to see each other at other EU CyberNet events. So I'd like to thank all participants, all the excellent speakers, also in particular the 3 speakers here on the panel, Towela, who has joined us from Johannesburg, Laura from Rome, and Björn Richter from Bonn, for their excellent contributions. And I understand that everybody who's in Brussels right now is invited to a reception. So we envy you for that. Fully share Björn Richter's envy at this physical meeting taking place over there in Brussels. And we hope you can continue your discussions probably in a more informal setting, and hopefully have some exchanges also on this last panel focusing on cyber capacity building in Africa. So with that, thanks again to all our listeners and to our speakers, and wish you an excellent day. Bye-bye from Berlin.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.